About half past the hour, it's the Therapeutic Thursday, and as promised, we're enjoying a visit now from Pastor Robbie Pruitt. Robbie, an Anglican pastor, lives in Virginia. His church is in Fairfax, Virginia, and he is the executive director of Preserving Bible Times as well. Something, a website you need to know about, preservingbiblettimes.org. It's a ministry. It's been around for almost 25 years now, and it specializes, it's focused on biblical context, teaching you what's been between the lines all the time there. So you might pay them a visit, and you'll enjoy what you see at preservingbiblettimes.org. Robbie, thanks for joining us. You've got a number of things on the agenda this morning, and we're talking about post-resurrection appearances by Jesus. And some of that is rather thinly documented, like, he's been seen by hundreds, but I'd love to see the details. But if you put the context together, sometimes you'll see the details emerge of what they're talking about. The road to Emmaus was an important point. There was the appearance to Thomas, and there were, of course, the women at the tomb, the morning of the resurrection. Where do we start on post-resurrection appearances?
Well, good to be with you, Jim and David, on the Broken Road as always. Joy to talk about biblical context. We love to do that at Preserving Bible Times, and I've been enjoying the video podcasts you've been putting out with us so far, and these have been a lot of fun, and hope people are enjoying them on YouTube, as well as Spotify and other podcast platforms such as Apple, which is just opening up their video component. And as we continue these, they'll get better. As just like those resurrection,
we're not going to get any better looking, though. If anybody wants to know what we look like, the podcast, video podcasts now are available on Broken Road Radio too. Go up to the podcast tab and click on Robbie's name, and there will be faces and everything. Yeah. So, I'm braced. So take a look and see what you see. And actually, I'd love your opinions on the video podcast, because normally when I get a video to see, somebody sends me a link, and if it's longer than 3 minutes, I don't do it because there's too many of those things. Mm-hmm. But if you really want to get into depth, you want to listen for 25 or 30 minutes, these podcasts can help you a lot, because Robbie is an expert. Well, it's his vocation, blending the Old and New Testaments so that one explains the other, back and forth. It all makes sense when you get that and the context along with it. So, Robbie, we're grateful to have you along. And post-resurrection appearances are critical, because we're all looking for proof that he is alive. We keep saying he's alive, he's risen. The Bible tells us that, but it's sometimes really. Oh, did we lose Robbie?
No, we're good. I'm here.
Oh, okay. Oh, your picture went black there for a second there.
Sorry about that.
Thought maybe I said something wrong. I don't know. No, here we are. No, we crave that proof that he's alive, and we take it on faith that he is, and that there's historical record that he is, even post-biblical, that he was resurrected. Where do we start in the incidents where he was seen in person after the resurrection?
Yeah, it's a good point. I believe we start at any of the resurrection appearances where the women are the first witnesses that they realize that Jesus has been raised from the dead. And so if you go over to, say, John's gospel and look over to John 20, you can see the resurrection appearance on the first day of the week. Mary Magdalene comes to the tomb early while it was still dark. That's chapter 20, verse 1 of John's gospel. And she saw that the stone had been taken away from the tomb. So she ran and went to Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one to whom Jesus loved, and said, "They have taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we do not know where they have laid him." So Peter goes out with John. This other disciple's not named, but we believe that this is the apostle John naming himself and writing himself into his gospel. John does this multiple times throughout his gospel account, but he doesn't name himself. He refers to himself as the disciple whom Jesus loved. He positions himself close to Jesus at the Last Supper. He also has himself at the cross, and who would know that other than John? John's the only disciple.
He has himself at Jesus' trial, which is amazing. Yeah. He's the only one there. Yeah.
That's right. And we know that John is Jewish and is probably part of the Jewish elite. At least he's connected with the high priest and some of the others. The text tells us that, which is what kind of gets him in with Jesus to go in, leaving Peter in the outer courtyard where Peter denies Jesus 3 times before the cock crows at the charcoal fire. And so we begin this resurrection appearance theme with John 20, verse 1, where Mary realizes that there's an empty tomb. And she goes and tells the other disciples and Peter. She ran and went to Peter. And then there's a foot race between Simon Peter and John. And John wants us to know that he beats Peter to the tomb. But Peter runs in first. And there's a lot of speculation about why that is. Some think because John is such an observant Jew, he doesn't go in because he's going to be impure. If he does, he's hesitant. But then the text does tell us.
Why do we have to make up reasons for that? Can't we just accept it at face value? Peter got there and went in, and John didn't.
Yeah, exactly. And I read that from Dr. Eli Lazorkin Eisenberg, who wrote the Jewish Gospel of John, kind of speculating.
Book, by the way. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great book, and he's speculating about John. However, we do know that John does go in. We do know that happens eventually. So they're running together. The disciple outran Peter, that's John, and stooping in, he saw the linen cloths laying there, but he did not go in. Then Simon Peter came, following him. He went into the tomb, and he saw the linen cloths lying there, and the face cloth which had been on Jesus's head, not lying with the other linen cloths, but folded up by itself in a place. So that the other disciple who had reached the tomb first, it says, also went in. That's verse 8. So we know that John does go into the tomb, witnesses the empty tomb, witnesses, and it says, and he saw and believed. So John sees and believes. And so John's gospel thesis or purpose statement of why he writes his gospel, John says, he says, many other things were written about Jesus that are not written in this book, but these were written that you might believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God, and that by believing you might have life in his name. So sight and blindness is a huge theme in John's gospel, and he wants you to know that he went into the tomb, he saw, and he believed in the resurrection. Now we believe.
Thinking of John and the year, the approximate time he wrote this was when he was an old man. So this would have been written decades after the events, basically to a new generation of Jews, and by that time, Hellenized and Orthodox Jews and Christians and a mix of people in Ephesus, where he was the I guess you could call him the bishop in Ephesus. And some say he was urged by his disciples to write the book because he had this reputation that he would never die because of what happened with Peter on the shore of Galilee after the resurrection, that he had this reputation that he was immortal. So he decided to set the facts straight and wrote this book. Maybe didn't even complete it himself, but we got it decades after the event. So when he says the face cloth was lying separate and folded, there's an important implication there. Someone folded it.
Yeah, and that's an eyewitness account that gives you that detail as well. So we know these are eyewitness accounts, but again, in the archaeological record, we have the archaeological remnants of burials as old as the 1st century with face cloths. We know that the Jews bury using this face cloth, and so this is a common Jewish burial. So that detail is important because we know that Jesus is a Jew. He's buried as a Jew. And so John, being Jewish, is going to point out the face cloth. So this is part of the Jewish burial. Now, the scholarship is divided. There are some scholars that say that John's gospel is written as early as 70 AD, right after the destruction of the temple, because there's not a lot of talk about the temple, though the tabernacle and temple layout, and we discussed this a little bit last week, I believe it was, about the layout of the tabernacle and the temple curtain and all of that, the tabernacle curtain as well as the temple curtain. John uses that as an outline of his gospel, though he doesn't talk much. He actually writes as if the temple is still there. So that's why a lot of folks believe it could be around 70. Chuck Missler, a biblical scholar, Protestant biblical scholar, puts John's gospel as one of the last books written. He says that he believes Revelation was written first, and then John writes his gospel. I believe that Revelation is the last book in the Bible written, probably around 90. And then, of course, John's gospel is written anywhere between 80, 85, and 100, depending on when John dies. So around 90.
John was the only apostle to die a natural death, wasn't he?
Yeah, they tried to boil him in oil, as church tradition has it, and it failed. And so they exiled him on the island of Patmos. And again, this is prophesied when the sons of thunder, John and James, Jesus is asked by their mother, grant that one of my sons sit at your right and your left in your kingdom. And Jesus says, you don't know what you're asking. Can you drink the cup that I'm going to drink? And she says, yeah, we can. They can. And he's talking about the cup of suffering. And then Jesus says, you will drink the cup, but to sit on the right or the left is not for me to grant. Well, we know that James, the brother of John, is the first disciple to be martyred. He's beheaded in Acts, I believe it's chapter 12, and then 11 or 12. And then John is the last disciple. So these are the bookend disciples. The first disciple to die, not the first martyr, that's Stephen, the first disciple to die, and the last. And so this is the sons of thunder. And so it's prophesied about. But I believe we know John's the oldest gospel. We know it's an eyewitness account. We know that John is there with Jesus throughout the mock trial. He's there in Gethsemane. He's at the cross. He's one of the first three witnesses of the resurrection.
You say John's is the oldest gospel or the oldest disciple? Because we have to. One of the things to keep in mind is all these books that we see together in the New Testament appeared separately on their own at various times in different places, and were used by some churches exclusively. They thrived on the book of Matthew or Mark or Luke or John. And they weren't all put together for a couple hundred years into the canon, the Bible as we know it. But did you mean that John's gospel was the oldest?
It's the oldest. Yeah, John is the last disciple. He's the most recent, is what I should have said. It was the last to be written.
I got you.
I misspoke. He's the youngest disciple, which means he's the last to die. So he's the oldest. He lives to a ripe old age, which the other disciples don't get that opportunity. So he is the oldest disciple in that he lives longest on this earth, which is why I believe Jesus, when Peter questions Jesus on this, and Peter says, what about him, referring to John? And Jesus said about John, if I want him to live forever, what's that to you? And you pick up on that in John 21. And that's another resurrection appearance when Jesus restores Peter. So John is the youngest disciple, but paradoxically, he's the oldest. So he lives longer than everybody. So his gospel is the youngest gospel because it was written latest.
And it's interesting, he persisted outside of Jerusalem. So he avoided the tragedy that was AD 70 when the Romans first laid siege to Jerusalem and then tore it down along with the temple. We don't know that any of the disciples were still there. We know that the book of Matthew may have gotten out early, because I've read where when Portuguese explorers first reached the west coast of India, they found churches that used the book of Matthew there. Somehow that book reached them centuries before. So there's a lot of interesting history between concerning each of the Gospels, and we struggle to put the pieces together historically.
Yeah. Mark was most likely written first, then Matthew, then Luke, and then John. So John is the last to be written. the latest in the history. And yeah, if you want a better account, read all of them and synthesize the accounts, which is kind of what we're doing today with the resurrection accounts, because we get a resurrection account in John's gospel, beginning at 20, the first witnesses, the women, Mary Magdalene in particular, then the second and the third witnesses, which are John and then Peter, and then the others. When Jesus starts appearing in the upper room, that happens twice, once without Thomas, and then again with Thomas. Later in John chapter 20, we see that.
Can we assume that John was the only apostle on the site of the crucifixion? Because we know that Jesus' mother and Joanna and Mary Magdalene and maybe another Mary, maybe the wife of Cleophas was there. But apparently John was there as well, because he took the direction from Christ on the cross to take care of Mary.
There's no record of any other disciple being there. Now, when I say disciple, I mean the 12. I would say that Mary and the wife,
the apostles to be, yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the apostles is probably a better way to say it. Disciple is a bigger term. I mean, I believe that certainly we can mean disciple when we're referring to the 12, but there are more disciples than that. There's the 70. Remember the 70 that are sent out? Those are disciples. And so Jesus has many followers, many disciples. And so we don't want to undermine that when we talk about the 12.
This combination, this synchronization of the books of the story,
harmonizing,
harmony
of the Gospels,
the bringing them all together. I mean, it almost sounds like a really, really good editing project. I mean that maybe somebody should write, and I'm not sure what you would call it, but put it together and combine the elements of all of the stories. And the big part of it that strikes me is that they spent 3 years with this guy walking around and saying, "I believe you, Lord. I believe you. Whatever you say, dear. Whatever you say, Lord." And then they're shocked when he rises again. And they said he told them over and over and over again, but they're surprised at the end.
Yeah, it's amazing, and I wonder how much I would understand or get. But the harmonization has happened. The chronological Bible will order the accounts as they occur. They'll put them side by side. A chronological study Bible will do that for you. It'll show you all the resurrection appearances side by side as they appear chronologically. Another good book that'll do it is Charts of Christian Theology and Doctrine, as well as Old and New Testament chart books. Highly recommend those by Zondervan. That's a great study resource. So it's Zondervan Charts book, and they have them on the New Testament, they have them on the Old Testament, and then they have them on the New Testament and theology as well. So you can track, they've actually charted out the harmony of the Gospels, what's in some Gospels, what's not in others. What do the resurrection appearances look like? What are the teachings on Christology throughout the Gospel accounts? And so I highly recommend those books.
That sounds so academic to me, though, and I treasure the different nature of the Gospel accounts. I want that preserved. I'd hate to see that watered down, so I'm glad we have them individually as well. Yeah. You can learn a lot by cross-references, but when you know why Matthew wrote his book and why he said what he did and why he started out with the genealogy and why Luke wrote his book and why John wrote his, Mark is the mystery, because he was the secretary, the amanuensis, you might say, to Peter. Some say, and I've read this, or Mark actually wrote the book of Mark with Peter during a time in Babylon when they were together. I don't know that that's true. I know that Mark wound up with Peter in Rome when Peter was executed, and he had future history of the church in Alexandria. But he was so close to Peter, that's reflected in his book.
Yeah. Yeah, and I would say nothing supplements just reading the text. Just read the text in its whole and follow the author's intended meaning and intent, reading each of the Gospels But then if you want to kind of get a more full picture, because each of them are including things that others are not, or excluding things, and they're writing from their own perspective, from their own purposes. So if you want to harmonize that, to use that word, or sync it up, you can get a more complete overall picture. And while it does sound academic, these chart books, what they do is they actually simplify it. They put them in columns with just verse references, and it's an easy read. It's not like dense theology. It's actually more like a graph or a chart. And
there you go.
So it simplifies it. And I highly recommend those just as a tool to, the text in its context sheds a whole lot of light on the commentary, as our Rabbi Doug Greenwald from Preserving Bible Times used to say. Put the text in its context. The context sheds a lot of light on the commentary.
So the walk to Emmaus, we wanted to deal with that too, because that's probably the most mystical of his appearances.
Yeah.
Because he appears and then he disappears.
Yeah. And before we even get to that, I just would point out that, Jesus appeared, and we get a resurrection account in Paul's letter to the Corinthians. 1 Corinthians 15 talks about how Jesus appeared. It says that Jesus was buried, 15:4, that he was raised on the third day according to the scriptures, and that he appeared to Cephas, there's Peter, and then to the 12. Then he appeared to more than 500 brothers at one time, most of them who are still alive, though some have fallen asleep. So we know that Jesus made resurrection appearances upwards of 40 days, that he roamed the earth before the ascension, and then Pentecost, the 50th day, the Holy Spirit comes. So Jesus is appearing to the upper room. He appears to Mary in the garden. He appears to Peter and the 10 without Thomas, and then the 11 with Thomas in the upper room. And then we get this account of the Emmaus Road, where Jesus feels somehow led to appear to these two, one of them unnamed, but another name. Now, not the original of the 12 apostles or disciples, but the larger grouping of disciples. So we have Cleopas. Are you the only visitor in Jerusalem who doesn't know these things? When Jesus shows up and says to these two, hey, what are you guys talking about? And Cleopas says, are you the only stranger in Jerusalem who doesn't know these things concerning Jesus of Nazareth? And Jesus plays dumb. He says, what things? And then they continue. Concerning Jesus of Nazareth, we thought he was a prophet, and that he said that he would be crucified, died, and raise again. But the chief priest delivered him up to be condemned to death and crucified him. But we had hoped he was the one to redeem Israel. And yes, besides all of this, it's now the third day since these things have happened. So timeline, third day since these things have happened. In other words, the crucifixion. This is most likely resurrection day.
And we might add, there's another interesting explanation here. It reminds us here in the West that they mark time differently. The beginning, this is not necessarily 3 days, but it's the third day. There was Friday, which was the first day. Then there's 6 p.m. Friday, or for us it would then be called Saturday. It was the new day. So that's the second day. And then 6 p.m. Saturday, it would have turned to Sunday. So that is the third day, but not 3 24-hour periods.
Yeah.
Analyze it, yeah.
And again, where the chronological charts come in handy, and kind of looking at all the gospel accounts, kind of syncing them up, all four of them, is because they're referenced here. These men, or potentially a man and a woman, these two disciples on the road to Emmaus, say, moreover, some women of our company amazed us that they were at the tomb early in the morning. So they're citing the women coming to find an empty tomb. And when they didn't find his body, they came back saying, they had seen a vision of angels and said that he was alive. So again, this is multiple resurrection accounts contained in Luke 24. And Luke's gospel account, particularly the road to Emmaus account, this is the only time this appears. This is there's no other gospel account that has the road to Emmaus. And then there's no other gospel account that has the restoration of Peter than John's gospel. So each of the gospels has their own unique capturing of the resurrection appearances.
Well, it's what each gospel writer thought was appropriate and important to say to prove his point and serve his purpose in writing that gospel.
Yeah.
Okay, so when you read this, it might be helpful to see yourself as a judge in a court of law. And there are these 4 eyewitnesses to what happened. So you need to put them together in your mind, hear them all out, test them all for their, verify them, and then put the story together in your head with this, as a judge would have to do in reaching a decision. So it's like in a real court case, eyewitness accounts will differ one from the other. And that doesn't make them invalid. It just says they were seen from a different point of view.
Yeah. And Simon Greenleaf, the lawyer, said that it's the variations in a story that actually communicates accuracy. If all the stories sync up and look alike, it's actually evidence that people have gotten together and gotten the story together.
Collusion, yes.
Yeah. So Simon Greenleaf said that, and he was a lawyer. He would know. And so really, these variations actually validate the accuracy of Scripture, and that this is and little details too.
The book of Luke also would be indicative that Luke interviewed people other than the original apostles to get his material together.
Exactly.
Because he has things that no one else included in their gospels.
Absolutely. So these details and this piecing together really do benefit the story as a whole, and really validates its accuracy. We get all these, little details like the face cloth. We get little details like, hey, the women were the first eyewitnesses. You would never put that in there if you were making this up, because women's testimony was not valid. So you would never have them being the first witnesses. So all of these little details not only validate the account, and we can reference the archaeological record, things like the stone tomb, like the rolling stone that goes over the tomb that seals the tomb. We've got that in the archaeological record. We have Jewish burials with the face cloths, all of these little details that are just confirming the accuracy of Scripture, and that the resurrection did happen, that it actually happened. And if you wanted to stop Christianity, you just produce a body. But they can't do that because the body has been raised and ascended. So what a great way to hide the body. It's not there. It's been ascended. It's been resurrected and ascended. So the Lord Jesus Christ is risen from the dead. We can take that to the bank. It's as accurate as history and science itself in the archaeology. And because he lives, we can live. And that's what we take from these resurrection accounts, that the same Spirit that raised Christ Jesus from the dead also lives in us, and how much more shall he give life to our mortal bodies.
And I dare say we can pick up where we left off on the walk to Emmaus. There's a lot more to discuss about that particular event. And maybe next week, Robbie, I don't know where you'll take us next week, but we're eager to get there. Thank you for coming and sharing time with us today.
Yes, thank you very much.
Joy, a privilege, and a pleasure, gentlemen, to be with you on the Broken Road. Thanks for having me on.
Bye-bye.